There's also the other side to that is that pregnancy is also a very anti-inflammatory time because of how much HCG and progesterone are being released into your system. If you've ever met a person who had an autoimmune disorder and they were pregnant, they usually say that was the time they felt the best because of this hormone situation.
I am so honored today to have the incredible Sabrina Solt on with us. I'm going to have her tell you a little bit about her story, where she's been, what her credentials are. I have watched this woman in action, and it was amazing. She has so much knowledge, expertise, passion in attending to health concerns and to attending to people's questions, and certainly has a lot of experience in the carnivore diet, which is very special, but women's health overall. So lots of things to touch base on today. Thank you and welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. That was such a kind introduction. I'm getting emotional, but thank you for being here. I'm honestly so excited to just talk to you. I mean, your story is just as inspirational, and you do such great work just leading people in the community. So thank you for having me. So I'm Dr. Sabrina Solt. I am a naturopathic medical doctor. I currently practice in Scottsdale, Arizona. Sort of. I'm actually stepping away because I'm taking a maternity leave because I'm expecting baby number 3, which is really, really exciting. But predominantly my practice was regenerative anti-aging medicine. So utilizing tools like stem cells, liver plasma, a lot of bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, nutritional therapies, and IV therapies as well too. So we can dive into any of that your listeners might be, interested in, or we can kind of go any direction you want.
Wow. Awesome. Awesome. I kind of want to start with your personal journey. I want to hear what your health journey has been like. What have been struggles? What have been some of the rabbit holes that you've gone on? You are obviously a passionate person. And when you get involved with something, I have the feeling you get really involved. Have there been side paths that led to some issues for you? How did you come around? How did meat come into the picture? And how long has that been in the picture?
Oh gosh, if we had to go like way, way back, I would say my first health concerns came up in 5th grade when I moved schools, had bullies, I was bullied, and developed a sort of like we'll call it an eating disorder. It was not full bulimia, but I was definitely having episodes of purging because I just felt like I hated myself because I was being bullied at that time. So with that, I kind of started to look at well, what is healthy then? If I can't be popular, I'm going to be healthy sort of thing. I'm just going to do the right thing for me. Which I think with looking back, I'm man, for an 11-year-old to think that, it was just weird. I've always been
That's some inner wisdom in there,
yeah.
to process that sort of a rebellion, because you had all this stuff coming out and you're like, well, I'm going to rebel and cope with this somehow. And a piece of that got into really murky waters, but a piece of that was calling you towards a wholeness journey.
Definitely. And I feel like if I had to pinpoint, that would be kind of where it started. And then I got really misguided, right? Because bless my mom, she's a wonderful mom, but I watched her try to, lose weight for years. Weight Watchers, those shakes that they used to make. What were they even? I don't even know what they were called.
Slim Fast?
Yes, Slim Fast shakes. Slim Fast shakes. She did the cabbage soup diet and just so I had these exposures to things that weren't quite right, and I kind of saw what was happening, didn't really love it. Fast forward, get into high school, there's a gym down the street from my school, so I would walk to the gym after school. First time I ever learned how to work out, and I really only did arms and abs and cardio. You don't know anything, right? But I was getting into it. So started I would exercise after school. My dad would come pick me up on his way home from work, go home, and I was still not eating great. So I come from also a very traditional Italian family. So most dinners would be carb heavy pasta dishes and things like that. And because of that issue, I actually suffered with really terrible acne, gut. I was tired all the time as a kid. I remember just only ever wanting to sleep. The weekends would come and I would take guitar classes on the weekend. My classes wouldn't start till 10:30 or 11, but my parents would still have to force me out of bed. I was exhausted. So it was just a lot of stuff. And I'm trying to figure out what's healthy in the meantime. And I went through this phase in high school where I was green tea is the answer. I'm going to drink all the cups of green tea because it's got like all these anti-aging properties. It has antioxidants in it. Like I was just green tea obsessed, and like it wasn't hurting
You
me.
put it on your face. You can, yeah, green tea solves all. Yeah.
I thought it was like the secret, and I was just like sold on green tea. Obviously, that wasn't the case, and I was still, again, not fully
Do you
dialed.
still use
Like,
it at all, by the way? Is there any green tea?
no, I haven't had any green tea probably since 2019. It's been a hot second. Yeah, I'm off that train. I think I had enough for a whole lifetime during those years. Gosh, it was so much. So I still wasn't eating well, right? Because at the same time, like I'm in high school, my parents are still responsible for buying groceries. Like I didn't have that much say in what was necessarily coming into the house to really change that up. And then I go to college, and I'm away from my family. I'm in a city about 3 hours away by driving, and terrible food choices, like
Yeah.
bags of the Mrs. Steele's cookies, pasta because it was easy to make and it's what I grew up on, like the random chicken breast here and there that I would like cook on the George Foreman grill, just not excellent. And then I actually had a friend halfway through college that was vegetarian / vegan. So I had this like stint where I was eating like a lot of beans, like the Ezekiel buns, a lot of hummus. And that I actually felt horrible. Like I knew like this does not agree with me. And it was like a peer pressure situation. It didn't last very long at all. And it wasn't until I was almost out of college that I learned more about like naturopathic medicine and started to really dive into like, what is a healthy diet? And at that point, it was more, I would say, Mediterranean based than anything. And that was kind of what I started gravitating to, but still very carb heavy. And then I get into naturopathic school, and then everything is all about plants and how amazing plants are. And we learn like, because we have, all these literally plant medicine classes, right? Like how to actually use plants, what they're all good for. And then, sorry?
Well, medicinally, it's different using a plant as a medicine versus using a plant as a food source, are a little different, right?
Completely different. And then this is the part that was odd, because we would learn about things like oats medicinally, right? But you have people eating them on an almost daily basis, depending on what their diet is. And you wonder, well, are all these medicinal actions still happening? Probably. And is that good for the body? Probably not. And then a lot of our nutrition professors and things like that, it was all about like milk alternatives and like meat alternatives. And then I kind of laugh looking back at it now, because NBs as a population, I'm not throwing my profession under the bus or anyone in particular under the bus, but we kind of come out of school, and I say we because I had this too, swear to God, this like superiority complex that, oh, we're doing things naturally, so we're way better than the MDs or the DOs that aren't, not realizing that we were just as brainwashed for the opposite way compared to how they were. Like they're obviously, very strict on, you have to have surgery, you have to have the drugs, you have to do all these things.
Western.
Exactly. And we were just like, oh no, we're so much better because we take the natural route. Right. And it's not true. Like, not to say that patients don't get better, but I do see a lot of the time where I've had patients come from other colleagues or other situations or online, like Facebook groups. They're put on piles of supplements. Nobody's actually taking a look at things in a meaningful way. And they end up spending years of their life, hundreds of thousands of dollars on these like advanced tests, all these different products to fix things that I've seen the carnivore diet fix in weeks.
Oh, wow.
So it's just, this has been, I mean, of course, now I've transitioned to carnivore, and I've been carnivore for about the last year and a half. Prior to that, I still was eating, a good amount of meat, but I still was very vegetable heavy. Like I would aim for 10 different plants every single day. And it wasn't helping me. At that point in my life, the biggest things I was struggling with was severe IBS. I would also still get some acne. I think that was just left over from I never really got rid of it. Like now my skin's super clear.
I'm looking at, I'm like, you're pregnant right now. Are you like 5 months pregnant?
21 weeks. Yeah. So pretty close. Yeah. Both there.
And so your skin looks glowing and perfect, but I definitely want to get into skin at some point. So, wow. Yes. Okay. So carnivore skin was part of the IBS was something that really helped. What did it do in terms of body composition, muscle? Were you having any issues along those lines? Any differences in that? How did that go?
So much. So when I was in medical school, I did 4 fitness competitions back to back. And that was a terrible idea, but I'll tell you kind of why I did it. One, The biggest reason was so that I would have structure and like strictness in my
Totally.
life. Because I wanted to study, I wanted to eat, I wanted to sleep, I wanted to exercise. And this was like the thing to do. And I'd always wanted to do one, like since high
Mhm.
school, like when I got into like my fitness stuff and I would see like the girls at the gym, like doing their fitness thing. And I was like, that's so cool. I'm going to try that out. Finally did it, really got into it, made a lot of friends in that sort of community that were way more on my level as far as having that as a passion. So that was neat. But it, again, it really damaged stuff for me. It really, really messed up my metabolism to the point where I had gained probably, compared to my most recent pre-pregnancy weight, I was probably a good 40 or 50 pounds heavier
Oh my
at
goodness.
my heaviest from
Just
that.
from all of the challenge, extreme challenge that your coaches or your protocols or the actual extreme over exercise would put on the body. Wow.
Yeah. And I honestly believe that I threw myself into deep nutrient deficiency, knowing what I know now, because you spend weeks basically eating chicken and tilapia. I've also not eaten tilapia in, gosh, at least 7 years. I refuse. And even asparagus now, like obviously I don't now, but
Yeah.
prior to carnivore, I would still just be like, we're just going to leave that behind. It got to a point where I was eating so much asparagus on a daily basis that it became too cumbersome for me to actually cook it. So I would just be eating it raw. Like
Oh, straight up.
it was gross. But you get used to it, just like anything else. I'm thinking to myself, like, no wonder everything crashed down. I was eating all these raw anti-nutrients, completely pushing my body to limits that it really shouldn't have been going, considering how much stress I was under with school, considering how, like, just plain chicken breast, like no fat coming in. I was a complete disaster. So yeah, probably about 40 or 50 pounds heavier than my like previous weight. And that was me at my heaviest. And then things really started to correct after that. After I was done medical school, I finished boards. And it was actually right after that that I met my now husband. And it was like kind of his influence that got me eating more because when I started dating him, he was making shakes. He would like meal prep stuff, but it was like more, I don't want to call it healthy, but it was certainly better than what I was eating before. Like there was more nutrients involved.
More
And
meat to go.
exactly, yes. So that really helped take a lot of weight off. And it came off pretty quickly after that when I just started to get my nutrient levels back in place. But on the body composition question, after about 6 months of me being carnivore, I was in better shape effortlessly than I ever was prepping for competition.
Whoa.
Swear to God, like without really trying, like I wasn't exercising anymore. I was working out, still do working about 6 to 8 days a month. Like just that's what my schedule would allow.
Yeah.
I was really just eating the carnivore diet. I wasn't doing anything special. I didn't count macros. I didn't track calories, like nothing at all. And I would have a six pack all day. No gas, no bloating, no like nothing. And I was just like, I didn't have this on stage, but obviously it's because I was eating so much freaking vegetables. Like,
Right. You were inflamed. It was getting your body so messed up. So
yeah.
that's amazing. And so were you seeing the same kind of lifts, PRs, like that kind of stuff too? Or was it just the physique or what was
Way
it?
stronger. I had never been able to do a pull up in my life. I was able to do pull ups. So that happened in August. So I went carnivore in like January, like right at the beginning of the year. My husband and I were both like, this is it, we're doing it. By
Yes.
August, I was able to finally do pull ups. So yeah, it took me some time to like fully build up that strength because there was so much healing that happened. And like, oh my God, my body went through a lot of weird stages with that healing.
Yeah.
But the actual like strength changes definitely came. And then the body composition stuff was also extra cool because it didn't affect my fertility. Like I was able to be that lean and still get pregnant. So it made me think like, is there actually any science to that? Like to women being not fat enough to be pregnant? Because that's like a thing people say. And I just
True.
realized it's not true.
I actually want to hear you. I've heard you talk about this before, Dr. Soult. I think you talked about this when you were visiting. And so because that can be a myth to some degree about, and I think, certainly I was going to ask you if you lost your cycle when you're doing all that training and everything. But I thought that perspective was important. Like, is it about body fat? Like if you're so lean, then you can't become pregnant. And that certainly in your situation, it was a little bit different. Tell me a little bit more about how that went.
Yeah, I actually don't recall exactly what my cycles were like prior, but I was on birth control for much of like going through college and medical school, that it's really hard for me to say what was off and what wasn't. I can really only speak to like, and this I think is with women in general, like it's hard to know what your natural cycle is doing if you've been on birth control for any measurable time.
Which
Because
most women have,
yeah,
you know, we can talk about cycle health, but like, what is it if have you had something kind of dictating that in your body for so long?
exactly. So I don't know again how much was artificially made by those chemicals that are fake hormones
Yep.
versus how much was my actual body doing. But I obviously went off birth control and have been off of it. I went off birth control. It was probably December of 2016, I believe, because my daughter was born in January of 2018. So I was pregnant throughout 2017 and I haven't been on it since. And as soon as I went off birth control, I got pregnant my next cycle. I unfortunately did lose that pregnancy and then had one cycle and then got pregnant with my daughter. And then we basically realized that like I don't cycle during nursing.
Oh,
My body just doesn't. Some women do. Some women are able to nurse and have a cycle at the same time. I don't do that. So I did get a cycle back. It was March. Well, I got pregnant with my son in March of 2020, and that was my last cycle. And it was really interesting because literally I have an Aura ring, so it tracks. So I tracked my cycle in there, and it was I think March 17th of 2020 was like day one of my last cycle, and got pregnant with my son, and then nursed him. And then I didn't even get a period after him, and I stopped our nursing relationship, and I'm pregnant now with number 3. So what's interesting to me about that is that I was at my leanest ever. I was eating all meat, like no antioxidants, no like nothing that people say you should be eating. And I got pregnant, like literally went straight into ovulation without a cycle on a over 2-year-old uterine lining, which is
oh, that hadn't shed. That's a really good point.
yeah,
Wow.
apparently my uterine lining was strong enough for 2 years to sustain a pregnancy. Again, we're at 21 weeks now without actually having to replenish itself, which I thought was really freaking cool to begin with.
Yep.
But I also, I don't know how religious you are, but like, man, sometimes you just have to like give it to God or creator or whatever you believe in, because there was no logical reason for me to get pregnant. Like to get pregnant without having a cycle and literally just go straight from nothing to ovulation and instant. I'm like, this was a gift. Like this baby was meant to be here.
Yes, yes. How often do you use with the fertility question? I mean, how often is that part of the picture with your clients and with your in your practice?
Not a ton. I actually don't have a ton of clients that are still trying to conceive. And the ones that are, we usually don't have a problem getting them pregnant. It's really neat. I mean, once you really kind of just dial in nutrition, dial in mitochondrial health, dial in, of course, all mineral levels and whatnot, make sure their hormones are functioning, stress is low. It seems to just happen. Like nature has a way of just doing what it's going to do.
Oh my goodness. Has this, so this is your first carnivore pregnancy? Are you pretty much 100% carnivore on this pregnancy right now? And
I would say, yeah, I would say 80 to 90%. Like if I'm having 2 meals plus a snack per day, one of those meals might have like a condiment or two on it, like because that's really what's helping me get down a lot of stuff. I had severe meat aversion at the begining of this.
oh, I was wondering, yeah.
Really bad. I still can't eat steak. I can do ground beef though, but ground beef completely plain like has been really hard for me. So I've been doing basically I'll take like just a couple tablespoons, like almost nothing, of just sugar-free pasta sauce, put it on top and like sprinkle some Parmesan and like kind of bake it. So it kind of all bakes in and it's delicious. Or I'll make like a burger bowl with like shredded cheese and I'll like pop up like half a pickle just to add like a little extra flavor to it. But that's pretty much it. I'll do like a quarter of an avocado with my eggs and bacon. But these are all things that I know don't bother me. Like if anything starts to bother me, it has to go because ultimately I want to feel my best. And that's what the carnivore diet has done for me
That's what
overall.
I think is so amazing. Carnivore can be a version of an elimination diet. Of course, for most of us, myself included, it's like our species specific, the thing that works best for me. This is where I stay. This is my zone. I don't mess around with it because I love it so much. And I get tons of variety. I don't have an issue about like, aren't you bored? Don't you miss this? I'm like, no, that's not even food to me. My body doesn't even recognize that as food anymore. But I do think for a lot of people, it seems like it can be that cutting out the noise. And so then there can be some things that can come back that for them doesn't cause the noise, doesn't cause the problems. And so what is the background? When people are having a meat aversion, how I love the tips that you were giving. What are some ways you help them with that? And why is that happening? What's the why behind that?
It's hard to know why exactly, but some of the research that I've come across as far as why this happens, at least in first trimester, has to do with there's some degree of research that supports that iron can be fetotoxic, meaning it can be toxic to a developing fetus in those first weeks. And this is usually when that meat aversion does show up. So that would be my guess. Like your body is strictly just trying to turn off any input of iron. But it's like that flip side to it too, right? Where now a lot of women go into this borderline anemic and then they end up anemic and then they end up having to take iron because maybe they still can't stomach the meat. So I think I honestly think it's like a really big balancing act with iron. And the interesting thing to me is that my iron, my ferritin levels are the highest they've ever been doing carnivore, and they're within normal ranges, which is good because previously I would be super anemic and I was very anemic with both my previous pregnancies. But I basically pre-gamed for this pregnancy with a ribeye every single day for basically a year. I was super good, but it also makes sense why I was so averse to meat in my first trimester because I would just load it up. Like
your reserves. So iron is one of those. What are some other chemical processes in the body that work off of a reserve system, or do most of the nutrients that we need work off of reserves?
So there's the difference between like your fat soluble vitamins versus water soluble vitamins. So your fat soluble vitamins are A, D, E, and K, and those will actually be stored in your fat tissue. A lot of the time people don't have to supplement those regularly, and sometimes taking those even on a regular basis can be dangerous. Like too much vitamin D, for example, can actually put you into kidney or liver failure. So just because something's a vitamin, I always tell people this doesn't mean that it's inherently safe. Whereas our water soluble vitamins, those are things that we have to be more cognizant of taking in on a daily basis. So we take it in, our body's going to utilize what it needs, and we're just going to eliminate the rest. This is why if you've ever taken like a B complex, you'll see like your urine will be pretty yellow afterwards.
I used to eat nutritional yeast. Oh boy.
Yeah. Yeah. But if you like just plain B complex vitamins, like they'll usually make your urine really yellow because everything is just going to escape you if you don't need it. Minerals can be a little bit different because minerals can get recycled through different processes, but there's still amounts that you need. And you can also put yourself into deficiency with a lot of them, especially if you're in a high demand time of your life, like during pregnancy and breastfeeding. This is actually an interesting conversation I was having with my husband the other day. You've seen him online. Like we have all the conversations on nutrition in our house are pretty interesting and they happen pretty frequently, but we were talking about just nutrition and pregnancy and like, how much does what the mom eats really impact that baby? And we kind of came to this because I was sick with COVID during this first trimester, really bad, where I basically didn't eat for 2 weeks. The baby kept growing.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
and you have these instances where moms are doing a lot of drugs, moms are vegan, moms are carnivore, moms are in comas. Like there's these really extreme situations, but the baby still grows. So my thought process then became, well, if we have our body, it's basically like a storage bank for everything the baby needs. Like it can pull minerals from our bones, from our hair, from our tissues. It can make protein from our muscles. It can pull fats from our fat. Like we're this beautiful bank to build this new baby. And so I start to wonder, is nutrition during pregnancy for the baby or for mom? And making sure I'm setting up my levels so that once this baby's out, I can still function. Because you start to see these moms after postpartum, and maybe they didn't eat the best diet, maybe it wasn't nutrient dense, whether you fall in whatever camp it is. But these instances of things like postpartum depression or that really difficult time, like just losing that excess body fat because your body's like, no, we're going to hold on to this energy. We don't have anything else coming in. I'm wondering, like, is that just from that level of nutrition? And again, it doesn't really affect the baby that much. Just my hypothesis. I don't know for sure, but just being in this, third pregnancy, paying attention to things a little bit differently. It was an interesting conversation.
I love that. I mean, as conceptually, I can so get behind that because the mother is the survival of the baby. So it kind of does loop back around. It is kind of about the baby, but yes, you're going through all these things up into that process and just making sure that she has something to recover from. That is an excellent point. And you're right that we hear about so much issues postpartum, and could that be nutritional deficiencies? And
Absolutely.
so, yeah, this insurance that we're putting up leading up, I love what you said, you put all the ribeyes in the bank, right?
Yep.
And so then when you were ready, your iron stuff was, going wonky, then you could cope with food aversions. And I think that when people on carnivore get like a meat aversion, they get so scared. And so they're like, this can't work for me. This doesn't work for me. But I like what you're saying. It's like, the longer that you have kind of been on this path, you can tolerate some versions like that. Like you said, when you're sick, we know the body has reserves, like you can't eat. We don't want to force eating in that period of time. So I love that. So it's kind of like this focus that we'll do anything for our kids, but we have a hard time doing for ourselves. Right?
Oh,
Yeah.
100%. Yes. And again, it's like pregnancy is such a weird time because that was actually one of the questions that I've been getting just on my Instagram a lot is like, I'm so averse to meat. What do I do? I'm like, first things first, like take it easy on yourself. You're literally growing an entire human, like give yourself some grace. You don't need to adhere to any rules unless you must for your own health. Like if you know for sure, like of course in the community, we know that there are people that they truly cannot eat anything,
Mhm.
anything else, or they will put themselves into some sort of like health deficit. There's also the other side to that is that pregnancy is also a very anti-inflammatory time because of how much HCG and progesterone are being released into your system. If you've ever met a person who had an autoimmune disorder and they were pregnant, they usually say that was the time they felt the best because of this hormone situation, which means that you can likely, if you had really serious stuff going into pregnancy and you need a carnivore to eat that way, you can probably try experimenting with other things that you now may be able to tolerate because of like the hormone storm happening.
Wow. And that's because of HCG being
H,
up. That's the growth for the baby. And what was
yep,
that after in that?
progesterone.
So, and is it ketogenic to any degree, or is that based solely on diet, or is there some kind of a metabolic feature as well? Like what I always hear about ketosis. Let's talk about ketosis and inflammation. So this is coming up in the context of a pregnancy, that you've got these progesterone, this HCG, which lowers the inflammation, and so it's like it's a different body for sure, right? And then is ketosis safe during that time? And in general, what's the relationship there between inflammation and ketosis?
So I think that I like to differentiate in the ketosis topic is that ketosis shouldn't mean a deficit in nutrients, and I don't like to use the word calories, but this is like something that people understand, or like a deficit in calories, because people will use ketosis as a way to possibly undereat protein or just undereat anything that their body might need. And that's what I don't agree with. I did come across,
It comes down so much when you're in ketosis. Is that what you're saying?
there might be an appetite decrease, but there also, I think this is just a misunderstanding too in the community whereby you don't have to be in ketosis 24/7 for ketosis to be effective. And it's okay if what you do is you're in ketosis for 18, 20 hours a day, but then you step out of it to eat. You do your gluconeogenesis with your protein. You get that glucose that your body still requires, not necessarily directly from the food, but from that process. And then you cycle back out. And that should be the goal, right? The goal should be that you become metabolically flexible enough that you're able to go back and forth between these two states very readily so that you can continue to utilize your fat stores for energy because that's what it prefers. What I find is that a lot of women especially really undereat protein, especially if they're not in the carnivore community. So their version of ketosis does really rely on a lot of fat, which can cause more stress on the body, at least I would say more in the long term. Usually they go about 2-3 months and they're really successful. And then something happens where the stress just gets turned up way too much. We start seeing their thyroid levels tank, cortisol levels go up. And it's usually because there isn't enough protein coming in to provide them the glucose that they need. And that's going to stress their body out. In pregnancy, it's a little bit different. So I did come across a research article and it said that fetal exposure to ketones in the last trimester or late pregnancy, I should say, didn't say last trimester, I said late pregnancy, was not good for the baby. And I had to like kind of take a step back and think, what's actually happening here? Because it's one of those situations where there's no good real pregnancy studies on diet, because it's completely unethical to do studies on pregnant women. Like pretty much, like there's not going to be any double-blind, placebo-controlled dietary intervention studies in pregnancy.
No.
So we kind of just have to use our best guess as far as what we know about nutrition and what we know to be helpful, logical, healthful even. And I sat back and I was like, why would this be a negative thing? And it makes you wonder if it's because those ketones are super elevated because of that mechanism that I mentioned earlier, which is this low protein intake.
Low protein. Why? Why were ketones high?
Exactly. The low protein intake feeding, not feeding a gluconeogenesis to give you that glucose that your body does need, which we know that you can make. Because I don't believe that ketones in and of themselves are harmful to a fetus, because babies are born in ketosis.
Thank you.
Why would we? So it didn't really quite make sense to me. And I think this is another part of like the sensationalism behind these studies that you see in the community that people get all up in arms about, like to prove they're one side or the other. They're not thinking about things necessarily logically or how it makes sense,
I love that perspective. You are so brilliant. Oh my goodness. Well, just hearing the back, when you see a study, you are already questioning as soon as you see it. You're a questioner. And this is so helpful because, it gets us kind of off cue. If we would hear that, we'd be like, well, babies are born in ketosis. What's really happening? But you're aware that, okay, the end goal of ketosis, how did you get there? Did you get there by denying the protective process of gluconeogenesis? And I have never heard gluconeogenesis described as necessary and protective and lowering cortisol. I'm not sure how widely known that is. In my community, in our community, there's a lot of thought about that, fat brings cortisol down, right? And so maybe you could speak to that just a little bit, because I'm very familiar with that concept of it. I've, taught that concept. I've heard that concept. I've read about that concept. And I understand it a little bit on the, chemistry level of why that is. But what you're saying is that gluconeogenesis itself with this rise is also very protective of our cortisol health.
Because you're going to be giving yourself the glucose, which is going to make it easier for other processes on your body, specifically thyroid hormone production. We love fat for possibly helping reduce cortisol. One of the reasons has to do with how it just feeds into your hormone cycle. So all your sex hormones start with cholesterol as a molecule, which we know comes from fat. And there's kind of a couple ways that it can go across the pathway. It can go across into making your sex hormones, or it can go down another pathway into making something called pregnenolone, and then it'll go into progesterone, and then it can go into cortisol. So sometimes that process, if you're going that too much, you can actually push that cortisol a little too far.
Like fat could actually cause an undesirable effect on cortisol. Is that what you're saying?
Possibly. Again, all these things, like nothing really happens in isolation, because we're not isolated like thermogenic pods. Like we're humans, and there's so much other stuff. So to say one thing happens in isolation, like I tend not to want to go there exactly, because like your circadian health really matters. Like, are you getting sunlight? How are your inherent stress levels in your environment, like your work, your family, your obligations, anything like that can play into it. Even your meal timing can sometimes have something to do with it. How much blue light you're exposed to, like toxins, like we could go on and on and on. So nothing's truly in isolation. But one of relations that I've just seen clinically is that if you are just pushing that like super high fat keto and ignoring your adequate protein intake, because protein intake we have to meet, like that is one of the things that like is non-negotiable. That's where I start to see the problems. Like I said, most of the time, it's so interesting. When I was first exposed to like ketosis as a therapeutic thing, I was in practice, and it was like 2000, I want to say 2017 or 2018. And when keto got that was like when keto got really popular. And I would get these slew of women in my office who had done keto, had great results for 3 months. They usually started because their husband wanted to do it. And then they started to gain the weight back. Their hormones were messed up. Namely, their thyroid was tanked, their cortisol would go up. And so that was kind of the thing that I learned from that, was that too much fat, not enough protein, because they were sticking to 80-20.
Right.
Basically forever and ever and ever, amen, and never actually paying attention to it. And that's when I realized, like, no, you have to be able to cycle into ketosis, but still maintain that. You don't need to be keto every meal all day long. it's obviously not doing you any favors and putting you into more of a stress state where now your body is wanting glucose. Because what cortisol is going to do is it wants to make you fight or flight.
Mhm.
And the best way to fuel fight or flight is with that fast acting glucose. That's kind of how we get to that point. And this is why like protein intake is just so important.
Oh, I love it. Awesome. So babies are born into ketogenic state, right? Breast
Yeah.
milk is ketogenic. And so how does that look like as babies and toddlers are developing? I mean, how do you feed your babies? How has that been? Has that changed? And have you seen, what have you seen the benefits of that? What do you recommend for your clients, for kids?
It's definitely changed. Our first child, we just fed like a normal kid. Like we did. So we fed her healthy. We fed her healthy. We never did like, she never had like, we were about goldfish or like chicken nuggets. Like we were healthy, right? So meats, vegetables, fruits, that was pretty much it. Like, and then the random, we used to get the like healthy snacks that were in a package that technically aren't healthy because there's still sugar and seed oils. So we don't do this anymore. But our daughter, she was exposed to basically all of that until a year and a half ago. And she's now about 5.5. So first 4 years of her life, she got used to eating a certain way. So she's definitely got a sweet tooth. And we've had to really kind of try to like reel that in with her. But she's pretty good. Like she will always kind of choose her meat first. She's beginning to really understand now how bad sugar is for us. And what we do with her is when she eats something that she shouldn't, we don't necessarily tell her no, but we make her pay attention to how she feels afterwards. Because at that age, she actually is old enough to understand, like, I don't necessarily like that, which is good. So one of the things that she realized doesn't actually agree with her is ketchup.
Oh,
So because she used to want to eat ketchup on her eggs, and you're like, there's sugar in here. Like there is, even if it's a no sugar added, it's still going to have some sugar because it's tomato based. And she wouldn't like how she felt after, and now she won't do it. So she has been able to self-select certain things, which has been good. But she's still like, if you were to go to the grocery store at the checkout, she'll still like want one of those organic lollipops. Like she still tries for things, but her breakfast every day recently has pretty much been, well, I say every day, except for like 1 or 2 days a week where I make them like animal-based pancakes. She'll do eggs, bacon, goat cheese, and some avocado. And she loves it in a bowl. And she's goes nuts for it. And she'll eat 2 slices of bacon, a quarter of an avocado, probably a tablespoon or 2 of goat cheese, and a whole egg. And it's for a 5-year-old, that's a pretty solid breakfast. Our little guy's a little bit different. So we went carnivore when he was about 1, just over 1. And I was still kind of nursing him some of the time. He was eating other food. And he had only tried like random things at that point. He wasn't eating anything in particular. So we really got to kind of transition him to almost a carnivore baby.
nice.
And there have been times where he has literally spit out something he was eating or threw something away that he was eating in order to go for the meat. Like he 1,000% prefers meat. And if you look at him, he's such a top heavy head. Like his head is so big compared to his body. And
he's a big brain.
Yes. And I forget who it was. I think it might have been Dr. Chafee who made a comment about how animal-based kids are likely going to have larger heads, larger brains.
They have bigger circumference. Yeah.
He does. And his teeth are perfect. They're the most perfect teeth I've ever seen in a child in my entire life. And I have to think like, it's got to be the diet. Like, the same gene pattern coming in. So it'll be interesting to see how this next one comes, with me being pretty much 100% carnivore pre-pregnancy and then like 80-90% during the pregnancy. It'll be cool to see how this house baby comes out. And I'm definitely really excited to see like just what my placenta and umbilical cord look like.
Oh yeah, no kidding. Oh my goodness. Do you guys do anything with that? Do you like save it or plant it, or do you have anything about the?
Yeah, so so I'm in the stem cell industry. Like that's what I do by trade. I do a lot of stem cell therapy. One of the things that and I hope this doesn't offend any of your listeners, I used to think that the cord blood registry stuff was a complete scam. And I'll say used to, but I still kind of do. And again, I don't want anyone to get mad if they like spend the money on it, whatever. But I have my reasons for thinking that. One being I'm in the industry. So the things that I have access to, the skill set that I have, to me, it was never a thing to want to do that. And then the second reason is that if you have your tissue or your child's tissue banked with one of those companies and you're listening to this right now, give the company a call, just for curiosity, fun time sake, and say, what would it take for me to be able to get a dosage of stem cells? And listen to what they say. Astronomical hoops that you would have to jump through, most of the time saying that it has to be an approved study. You have to have multiple doctors' approval on it. It usually can't even be for the person that it was banked for. It's really like deep. So I never did it. And then there's this company that I've worked with for years who we have used to bank my adult patients' stem cells. So we would send like 4 to 6 tablespoons of their patient's fat to them. They would bank like 25 to 30 doses of their own stem cells they could then request at any point in their life, which was really cool. And then about a year or so ago, they started a new branch of their company where you can actually bank your own baby's umbilical cord. And what they do is they do a similar process to the adult where they actually make the stem cell doses for you that you can actually request at any point in time.
And it's ready to go. Yeah.
100%. So this way, like this is what we're planning to do with ours afterwards. And I can share the details with you offline if anybody else is interested. I don't want to do like a promo right now for a company, but I feel really confident with this choice just because I love the idea of being able to have access to stem cells for our whole family for the next 25 to 30 years.
Oh, I love it. It's so good. I know I've heard of different folks, you know, with the umbilical, with the placenta would grind it up and eat it, and, you know, different kind of cultures or whatever doing this, but you're kind of banking that from a molecular standpoint for down the road, just going to have this available for the family. So
yes.
I love it.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't necessarily agree with, it's not something I would personally do is consume the placenta.
Yep.
Just because I do believe that it acts as a filter between the mom and the baby.
Okay.
And there have been times where they have studied placentas and do find amounts of things like heavy metals and stuff in them that is protection. I just don't want to reconsume that. Like if it's leaving my body via the placenta, like I'm done with you.
Of filters in the body, and I don't think this is accurate. I used to hear about the liver being referred to as a filter, and now I'm thinking that that's not really what the liver is, right? And then is that something that that you prioritize with the organ meats with your family, with your kiddos during your pregnancy? Is that something that's been a part of the picture for you guys?
I used organs at the very beginning because I felt like helping me with energy, because I think I mentioned like I just went through like really weird peaks and valleys with my healing. Like,
oh yeah, the healing cycles.
Oh man, it was just really, really weird. But I feel like having those organs were just giving me nutrients, because what people don't understand is like healing, yes, it happens, but it's a very high nutrient required state, because not only do you have to have all the things that you require on a daily basis, you still have to have enough for repletion of the stuff that you're using to actually do those detox and healing processes.
Which is a taxing process. The process itself is exhausting, right?
Exactly. I felt like even though I was eating 1-2 pounds of meat plus, bacon, eggs, like other stuff per day, I still wanted those extra micronutrients coming in, and it was helpful for me at the beginning. Now I don't go for them. And I really try to like trust my body with what I'm going for supplement wise. Like if I'm feeling a no internally, I'm just not going to do it. I felt really big yeses initially, and now I'm just like, they're there in my cupboard, feeling no's to them. But I think liver is really nutritious for certain populations, especially people who, and I've seen this in clinical practice with some carnivores that I've done labs on. People who have the MTHFR defect tend to be really low in folate and sometimes even B12. Liver tends to be a really great source of that for a lot of people. So it can be a good choice for that. I don't think it's necessarily required.
Okay. And do you feel like it's if people are getting benefit if they take it in a pill or a dried? I like the Carnivore crisp liver. That's like how I get my liver. And I think it's really yummy. I know it's funny, but and then like, do you think that there's some benefit in all versions of that, or do you feel uncertain about that?
So capsules, I think the company matters. I had a patient who's carnivore for a very long period of time, and they were taking it was a liver. They were taking both a liver and like a multi-organ complex from, I'm just going to shout them out because it's the Ancestral Supplements line. They had been taking them religiously for 6 months to a year. Their folate levels and B12 levels were almost nothing. So part of me wonders like how much filler was actually in those products compared to the organ amounts, because there was no logical way that this patient should have had those levels based on what they were dosing for that length of time. So I tend to not trust a lot of companies just just because like, unless a company can actually show you third-party certificates of analysis, I would try to stay away. I don't think that company has any.
Yep, absolutely. No, that makes sense. And I think that the body does call out for that if it's needing it. Do your kids like it? Have they ever tried it, or have you just like not had
Yeah,
it?
no, we have. So my husband has cooked it because he enjoys it more than
Yes.
I do, and he will also cook heart sometimes too. And
Oh,
we'll get
yum.
it from a local butcher, fresh, grass fed, and the kids have both eaten that and enjoyed it. I'm like, you know what, I'm good. I'm good.
I'm just having a hard time with my ground beef and pickles over here,
Yep,
y'all. Y'all have fun. Go for it.
you do you.
I have heard about this concept of the healing cycles, and we talked about that, but I'd love to hear a little bit more thoughts because as we in our group will get so many people transitioning, and you mentioned specifically a 12-week healing cycle, and I have used that quite a bit. I've said, well, Dr. Soult believes in a 12-week healing cycle. That has been a huge encouragement. And when I just say that people are like, oh, they just get such a relief that they didn't feel 100% immediately. So tell me about, why do you think that timeline is significant, and what are some of the things besides the organ meat that you see being pretty effective in helping people, for them to consider?
Yeah, so it has to do with just like the body's physiological healing cycles and what happens. Like whether you get a cut on your arm, whether you're recovering from knee surgery, like there is a way that healing occurs, and we really can't do anything about it. Like it's going to just happen the way that it happens. Like that's just it. And what we're going to kind of almost bypass with something like a diet change is that initially there's usually what we call an inflammatory response, which is where the body is purposely turning up inflammation to bring more blood flow to areas. And yes, this still can happen. It just might not present as like quote unquote inflammation. But you can initially feel like a worsening.
Kind
So
of a crisis. It sort
yes,
of incites a crisis in the body, where the body's in a little bit of shock. It's like, what's going on, and sending helpers, right? And that's the
yes,
same way as an inflammatory. It's like sending helpers to the scene.
exactly. And that usually happens the first 3 to 7 days, sometimes as long as 10 in certain people, but like initially, definitely that shock. And then the next phase we call the proliferation phase. And this is basically where the new scaffolding starts to get laid down for the work that needs to happen to start to happen. And in this scaffolding phase, this is the time to actually like really dial it in. And sometimes people do start to feel better in this phase because that initial inflammation started to turn down, but no actual healing has happened yet. So it's again, just preparing. It's like we're bringing the supplies to the construction site, we're dropping off the bricks and the plywood, whatever it is, but we're not building yet. And this phase usually takes about 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the individual and depending how, I don't like the word strict, but depending on how like goal focused they are.
Will
I
this
feel like,
be the time that you could see some weight gain? When you were just thinking
oh,
about,
absolutely. More resources coming in. That is
that's what I was
100%.
wondering. Yeah.
Yes, 100%. And it's not necessarily a bad thing if you are putting on weight during this time, because it means your body needs it. It's like, yes, give me this fuel. I'm going to store this here because I need to build. So let me just have this. Totally fine. Like, and if that's, and if there's no wrong way to heal, I just need to put that out there as well. Like, you will not heal wrong as long as you are ultimately moving in the right direction. But that doesn't mean also that healing is linear. Like, you can have an up, you can have a plateau, maybe you can have a slight dip, but you should never feel as bad as you did when you first started. So if that's happening, this is a whole other, carnivore community conversation. I feel like there's some gaslighting that happens in the carnivore community, and that when people do start to feel worse in this healing cycle, that they're told to just carnivore harder. And that's rarely the case in my experience, that you do
That's
not
almost
need
like
to.
saying it's your fault, right?
Yes,
That's almost like
yes,
victim blaming.
exactly. And I don't think that's useful for anybody, because chances are, like, if somebody is there, they're genuinely concerned, they've been working really hard, it's because they are carnivoring hard, and maybe they do need some additional support. Maybe they are, super deficient in a really, really vital nutrient that's going to carry these processes forward, and they need to have something looked at, right? Maybe their thyroid is completely tanked. Maybe their cortisol levels are super high. Like, there's so many things that can be considered. Maybe they're dealing with toxic mold. Maybe they're like, there's so many things that, like, you're never going to heal wrong, but if something is wrong while you're healing, like, get the help that you need. So 4 to 6 weeks for that like weird intermediary cycle. You might feel better, you might gain weight, but it's that cycle where just like let it happen and stick to it. When we start to actually see the real changes happen, it's after that 6 weeks, minimum 12 weeks. Now, if you've ever had a surgical scar, you know that surgical scar is going to look a certain way 6 weeks after surgery, 12 weeks after surgery, but it's also going to look different 2 years later. That's that remodeling period where healing can occur for a long period of time, and it might need to take that long. My general rule is that for every year you were sick, allow at least 1 month of healing.
Oh,
So that puts into perspective for a lot of people. Like if you've
that's
had
still
20 years
short.
sick, it is at least 1 month. So I say at least.
Thank you.
So if you've been sick for 20 years, like give yourself a couple years to heal. It's certainly completely unrealistic to have expectations that in a couple weeks you're going to be better. And when we see people in the community who have had really great success, like it's taken you time to reach this point, and there's been a whole journey involved. And to expect somebody else's results right away, I think is, we just need to readjust.
Beautiful. Okay, speaking of results, a lot of people on carnivore are hitting that time where they've been carnivore for many, many months to years and are like in the weight loss stall, the dreaded question, the plateau. So what are some things that you look at when someone's in that space and they've been patient, they're wanting, but it's just still not happening for them? What are some of the big things that you look at?
Oh, I would say 3 main things that I look at. 1, hormone levels, especially women as they start aging, premenopause, perimenopause, menopause. That can have a really big, really big impact on how much weight you're going to hold on to or how difficult it is to lose. Second thing, muscle mass. It becomes so much more harder to keep on lean muscle mass as you age. That's your active tissue. If you're not maintaining that, growing it, actively cultivating that, you're going to set yourself up for a difficult time with removing excess fat. And then the third thing is simply micronutrient levels. Your body will always hold on to excess fat if it thinks it's starving. And it can think it's starving if even just one micronutrient isn't coming in adequate levels. So looking at those will help balance it. And I have a post on my Instagram timeline. It's like the top, I think, 5 or 6 nutrients that I see deficient in carnivores.
Awesome.
And it has to do with a lot of the time that people are eating a lot of beef. And beef is great. Don't get me wrong. It has a ton of vital nutrients, but it usually is missing a lot of critical minerals.
So they might need more variety.
Yep. Seafood is a really great thing to add in with that.
Oh, beautiful. And that's on your, is it on your highlights on your Instagram?
Just a post on my page. I think it says it's like the 5 or 6 nutrients that most carnivores can be deficient in.
Oh my goodness. I love that. It's important. I have just appreciated this time with you so much. I feel like we covered just a little teeny bit of, what we could cover. I hope we get a chance to circle back and do this again. I want to hear about, we know the main exciting development, and this was so special because you actually announced this in our group. And so we kind of got to know it for everybody else. And it was really fun. You were having a nice conversation with Bella. It's like, oh, we know the secrets. So it was fun when you came out with it. We're like, we already knew.
Yes.
And so, yeah, this is great. But what's happening with your business, your company, what endeavors, where can we find you? Just tell us all about that.
Yeah, I'm most active on Instagram, just at Dr. Soult on there. We do have our free carnivore focused Facebook group. It's called Carnivore, Harder, Happier, Healthier. And we also have a YouTube channel, my husband and I, that's also linked on my Instagram. We try to just post helpful videos on there, just talking about information, just like we did now. My business is still completely running. I have another doctor working for me who's awesome. She spent literally hundreds of hours with me at this point. She kind of gets my brain, gets how I do things, how I like things. So everything there is staying there. And I haven't decided quite yet what I'm going to do after this baby's born. My goal is to really just kind of focus on this pregnancy, have a really low stress 3rd trimester, and just like really enjoy bringing this baby into the world. So I never got to do that with my last 2. I was really, really work focused, and I realized it was just a terrible priority base that I had, and I'm trying to do different this time.
Work-life balance. I feel like when a mom takes that time and that healing time in her life, that priority time, it just helps heal the world. I don't think there's anything more important than we can do. And I mean, I love that you're in tune with that, the passion that you've had so far. You've helped so many people. You're continuing to educate so many people, such a beautiful light, and your husband as well. So just thank you for the impact that you guys have. You're really, truly changing a lot of lives. And it has been an absolute pleasure to learn so much more from you. Thank you, Dr. Soult.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I would definitely love to come back for a part 2.
Thank you. I love it.